Inara Paladins' newest champion with OB45 and our new favourite Stone Lady. Now, she's not really been insta-picked as much as the other champions that have come out so far, and maybe this is because she seems a bit lackluster in the casual matches, unable to carry as much as flankers or damage, or maybe it is just that she is a frontliner and they are less popular in general, or perhaps people just don't think she is good. So to take that all into consideration, today I will answer just that question: is she good or not? So let's dive straight into the statistic. She has 675 damage per 1 second. If you hit all the projectiles and they're in a burst, so basically they fire off in 0.4 seconds, then there's a 0.6 second wait basically between that. How does that stack up? Well, Makoa does 650 every second, but doesn't have to hit all those 3 shots. Torvald does 500 a second, and Ruckus at full spinned up can do 1590 damage per second. And Barrack's DPS is harder to work out because you're going to be having the blunderbuss and the turrets, but Barrack definitely does have higher damage. Something to take into consideration is Inara also has heavy damage fall off in her projectiles at range, which means you practically tickle enemy targets when they're further away, if you can hit them at all, because there's travel time on the shots and they are generally hard to aim. So you have 3 shots, each of them an individual projectile with travel time, and they spread at distance, so in the burst they spread in like a bit of a cone of fire bloom, and it is very hard to hit all 3 shots, often even if somebody is close to you. Once you start moving, those projectiles will be disrupted because you fire them in that burst, so you don't have as much control over each shot. So when you're moving, there'll be a bit of a random pattern. What I'd advise is when you are firing with Inara, don't hold down, just fire it, and then concentrate on moving your mouse or your controller analog stick to aim each shot, so that you don't have to put the thought into the clicking and then click every time it's up. Often with weapons you say don't hold down the click, and I think it's the same with this burst weapon. Personally with the damage, I think either the damage fall off needs to be tweaked, or there needs to be some sort of benefit for hitting all 3 of the projectiles, because it is relatively hard to hit all 3, and that could give her a bit more of a damage advantage. But then I'm going to talk about other things that could change about Inara that could make her a bit better as well. So Inara has 4,400 HP base, and it goes up to 5,000 with cards. That's lower than Makoa and Fernando base, but a bit higher than Barrack. Her Other Than Guard ability does increase her theoretical HP by giving a flat 30% damage reduction for 5 seconds. You have 5 seconds to take a team's burst, and in that 5 seconds you could be taking thousands of damage, and that could basically buff up more, because if you take 3,000 damage, you're going to be blocking 900 HP of that, for example. And this can be bumped up to 50% with the legendary Mother's Grace, and further with a card called Sacred Ground that can give a 20% damage reduction on top of either of those or both of them together. But it has been confirmed that stacking these damage reductions with a damage reduction item, and say Ruckus Repulsor Field, will not give 100% reduction, because that would go over the 100%, but more like 80%. And the devs have said there are diminishing returns, so basically the damage reductions start multiplying with each other, and you get less and less as it gets bigger and bigger. So it seems harder to get like towards that 100%, so you do hit sort of an 80% cap. So in short, she's kind of average damaging as most of the other frontliners, but is less reliable in her fire, and isn't base as tanky as some others can be with certain cards. And for me, Inara's big downside at the moment is she has no movement ability or escape ability. And also, unlike all the other champions that don't have a movement ability, she has no cards to increase movement speed. And basically she's very vulnerable to enemy damage dealers, and really once she's in an engagement, she'll really struggle to get out. Honestly, I don't have that much love for no movement champions, and it limits how aggressive you can be. Basically, it's not just escaping from a fight and getting out of there, you can't chase down enemies that are low, and basically yeah, so you've got the chase and you've got the disengage that you're really lacking with Inara. She also doesn't have the self-heal of Torvald's Gauntlet Shields to help her out, or some of the movement speed cards which I've mentioned. Even though there are other champions that aren't very mobile, they have other things that sort of make up for it. But let's go on to her pluses. So her big utility, and I guess a gimmick and some reasons why she's been seen a bit as a one-trick pony, is her shield Impasse. This wall has 6,500 HP and is a deployable, so countered by Bulldozer over Wrecker, which is one of the pluses, because if you have a tank with a shield and you as a tank as well, the enemy team might think about taking Wrecker and Bulldozer, but if you're on your own, they probably won't take any at all. So the biggest utility with the walls is blocking off attack routes entirely. You can basically just wall off sections of the map, and it's very hard to take it down in time. and to funnel enemies into a pattern or attack that you want them to come around so that it's harder for them to attack a point. They can't go straight directly to it as fast as possible, for example. But also it's good at stopping enemies from escaping, so if you are taking them down and they are low, you can put the wall behind them and stop them from running away. You can also take it down if you misplace it or you want to get at the other side, or like basically with a team just fire through it when the enemy don't expect it. It can also be buffed with damage reduction from your earthen guards, which is your right click, which I've talked about earlier. And also with a legendary Tremors, the cooldown is reduced by 7 seconds, taking it to an 8-second cooldown, but you still have to remember it won't cool down until the first 5-second wall is down. Personally, I think it works best in an organised group, so you can respond to team flanks and generally react to the flow of the fight, and basically call out when you are going to put the wall up so your damage champions know not to use, say, Planted on Charlene or to fire off a fire spit with Drogos. As we go into the downsides now, you can easily block off an ally and enemy fire alike, and it's hard to judge whether blocking enemy incoming fire is better than losing your allies. Especially like I mentioned, if you don't know if a damage dealer is going to start going into Planted if it's a Charlene, or there's going to be a fire spit going through, or generally just fire going through in general that might do more than your wall blocks. And that means without a team on Discord or TeamSpeak or some sort of voice communication, it's hard to know exactly what your teammates are thinking, so you might end up being detrimental to the battle. Another downside is a lot of maps have elevation around a point or just in general, and it's hard to block a ground level and upper level and be useful with it, so enemies can go above on another level and just basically shoot behind the wall, and it's not going to really do anything. Also, the 5-second uptime isn't great, and though there is a card to increase it up to 2 seconds, so that's 7 seconds in total, and along with the cooldown of 15 seconds, you can't use it all the time. And I think if she was just a one-trick pony and this was a lot more spammable, then it might be forgivable, but the problem is with her other abilities at the moment, and how rounded of a champion she is at the moment, I feel. And again, the wall itself actually isn't very high, and a Drogos or any damage champion on a vantage point will be able to basically just pot shot you whilst you're behind it, and Inara doesn't have a movement ability, so can't really get away from it, so even her basically, the wall is her escape, but it's not that great of an escape against quite a lot of the damage dealers. Next up is Warder's Feel, and this is her obelisk that she can place on the floor. It sort of slows enemies in an area and deals damage. But it can be buffed to have a cripple with the legendary card Treacherous Ground, which stops people from using escape abilities. And on base, it does give that 60% movement speed reduction, and it's pretty much put down at your feet. It is good on the point, as its size does cover most of it, and it can last up to 5 seconds and does 150 damage per second. And it does have a relatively big health ball, so hard to take out. And it is great whilst used with your wall to block off an obvious escape route for enemies and keep them inside the radius of the Warder's Field. However, this also has quite a few problems. The main thing at the moment is that it's placed at your feet. You're not fast, so you can't close the distance with enemy champions, and most champions will be attacking you from a distance because they know that you can't do a lot to chase them down, and that they need to keep their distance so you can't do the full damage to them with your left click. Basically, enemies can just kite you and just not bother at all with the Warder's Field. Personally, I think it should have some deployed distance, even if this is at the disadvantage of the size of the obelisk health ball, because why destroy it anyway if you can simply avoid it and basically just fire at the enemy and kill them before it has any effect. The other option could be to increase the radius slightly of the obelisk, which might catch more people and be a bit more useful. Because at the moment I just feel that unless a flanker is out of position and is too close to you, you can't punish them for it. Which is sort of the frontliner's role in the game's paper, scissors, rock. Damage beats tank, tank beats flank, flank beats damage. Well, roughly speaking, that's not actually how it works, but it's sort of how things play out in the game. Finally, her ultimate has been poo-pooed or praised depending on how pro Inara you are. It basically stuns enemy in a largest flat area over 2 seconds. There is a little damage, but it's nothing to write home about, and it does pierce shields, so that is a plus. And it's great when enemies group up, or your allies, especially damage dealers, all have line of sight on the enemies, and you know that, so everyone's up and ready to fight, and that can lead to a team wipe. But it also does have some problems. Firstly, it has a long charge up time, which Inara calls out, "You're not welcome here," to let everyone know. Literally everyone. And in this time, you're really vulnerable to enemy fire, and to get it off reliably, you need to have a good vantage point, which also means you'll be easy to spot and fire at. A lot of these ultis are just shut down before they can begin, and I'll have it on charge for quite a long time and never find the right time to use it because I'll either be low health or my allies aren't there. and it won't be that useful. And if you do try to be safe and do it lower down or behind cover, you might accidentally just hit another level of the map, and it might have no effect. Also, Resilience, the item that affects crowd control abilities, is a bigger deal now because Haven and Blast Shields were nerfed, which can make this ult nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Personally, I think it could do with a lower charge up time, or some more damage, or something to make it more valuable and less able to be shut down. So that's pretty much Inara's abilities and cards in a nutshell, and the other cards in her deck are kind of generic and just sort of increase or reduce cooldowns and things like that. But let's go on to the map she's good in. Jaguar Falls for me is the main one. Basically, this map has no high vantage point areas overlooking the capture zone, which is really important for Inara, so your wall means a lot more because people will find it harder to fire over. Only a Drogos can jump up and fire over it, really. Also, the entrances on the left and the right are easy to block off, so it's easy to block an enemy group flanking together and stop them from running onto the point. And also, the same way you can block off the front from lots of damage, and you can also catch people in your warder's field in the two side buildings, and they find it much harder to get away, which is why I do like the legendary Witch Cripples with the Warder's Field on Jaguar Falls, is you can catch a lot of people out. Ice Mines is also a bit like this, like there's easy places to block off flank routes and just basically control the flow of the battle. And I think Frozen Guard on the point isn't too bad because there's only one vantage point over the capture zone. I think Stone Keep is okay. There's only one vantage point, and she's great once you're winning in Stone Keep to drop down and stop them from coming straight through the archway, which is the quickest way to the point. And Serpent Beach is alright, but there is that higher platform above the point. It's very hard to basically block off one zone, and then you'll have damage dealers on the top level, and often they'll be firing down on you, and it can be very difficult to survive as an arrow on a point or around the point. And I feel that Fish Market and Timbermill are harder to be viable because of just how open the mats are, and the walls don't really do an awful lot. Like there's, on Fish Market especially, there's so many areas to, so many ways to come from, and it's very like open-aired, and it's hard to block people off and make it actually useful to block them off that way. Champions that are bad against with Inara is basically all damage champions, but especially a Drogos because they can elevate above the wall and inflict damage. And they can also easily track you as a slow Inara with their projectiles, and with Fusillade with their extra damage, they can just pretty much blast you down. And whenever I played Inara and I saw a Drogos come up in casual, I was just like, not again. And you don't really want to be going up against double damage dealer lineups. If they take a double flank, then you might be a bit more in luck because they'll be doing less damage, you'll be able to catch them out with your Warder's Field, and that's where you might excel a bit more. On your own side, in your own composition, it benefits a lot from another tank like a Makoa, whilst the walls are on cooldown because you're very vulnerable, and they can also give you that shielding and be aggressive and let you sort of maybe hold back, or we put up the walls and then you pull back with them, and like their shield acts as your escape. But the thing is that Inara doesn't give you the same sort of damage as a Baraka Ruckus, as sort of like an off tank and sort of a defensive tank. So that's always something to think about. But something else that you really need is a main healer. So Hamel Dumba is great because they can focus the heals on you, and Ying with big heals, as all of your health pool is health points, and you'd have no shields like a Torvald or something else. So, and basically you can't really dodge attacks very well, so you will be needing constant heals. With your damage reduction, you might be able to tank a lot of it, but without a healer, you're not going to be able to stay alive. I think a Pocket Grok can work staying close and doing damage, but I mean, they're also not that mobile, and I guess with you, they can just sort of babysit you a little bit. Anyway, moving on to sort of just the general play with Inara and how she's playing out at the moment, I just feel that Inara is most useful now when you're already winning. And what I mean by this is when you've team wipe the enemy and you come to that sort of zoning phase when you're knocking off the horses, stopping them from coming in to have like a counter attack, because you can block off ways to attack the payload and force them basically to take you head on or out of the way of the payload, or it's in some way at a disadvantage to them coming back onto the point. And especially when you get to that point where you're blocking off their spawn room, as you're going to have a lot of effect there as well. She also just feels like she doesn't have any self-sustain, and like I said, she does need a healer, because the health regen cards in her deck don't do an awful lot. They're very small amounts, and also you often have to use them. One of them you use them in Warder's Field, which you have to place down, and the other one with your right click. But I personally prefer the flat HP increase at the moment, and like I said, with a dedicated healer, that's going to mean more, because obviously they'll be able to heal it back up to full health more often, and generally be more tanky from the get-go. There are funny and clutch moments when you block, like, say, a Sky, Bomb King, or Drogo's ultimate, but for the most part, I'd say Inara is a bit underwhelming to play. She's not fun to play. Like, you can't carry with her, you can't be really super aggressive with her because there's no escape, there's no chase, and I feel a bit the utility of the wall gets a little old. And I would say she isn't the casual stomper, or maybe not even not a ranked pickup, basically because you need some communication in your team, when to use the wall, when your enemies actually want to fire so you can take the wall down, and things like that to really pull off the viable strategies with Inara. And I do think that she can pull off some viable strats with the competitive scene and with her wall utility, because it does change the flow of the fight so much, and it is quite hard to take that wall down. So I'd say at the moment Inara is okay, but there's a few things that are frustrating about her, and a few ways to nudge her into being in the meta and making it a little better, so that she's viable at all levels of play. But yeah, for now, I'd say she's frustrating to play. I've not exactly had a lot of fun with her, but I can see how she can fit in. Anyway, what does everyone else think about Inara? Do you disagree with what I think, or do you think that she's maybe really underpowered? Because a lot of people, sort of like what I've gauged in casual games, so people are like, oh man, Inara sucks, why did you pick Inara? And when I don't think she sucks, but I just think that she needs a little nudge, or just to make it more fun, and to just push her a little bit up the meta. Be sure to let me know anyway what you think in the comments section below. Like if you enjoyed the video, dislike if you didn't, and subscribe for more of my content. Thank you all very much for watching. Until next time, Joshino.